4 minutes.
Thank you. That was very speedy, and we appreciate it. Because we know why these people are here. They're here to hear from these candidates. So let's give them a big hand. And before we move into the actual questions, I want to introduce our volunteer moderator from Eanes ISD, right down the road from us, Jill Van Voorhis. Thank you, Jill. And before she starts, I would like to read the forum rules that all the candidates have seen, and which we expect all audience members will follow. And in addition to that, I'd like to read a statement from Erin Archer, who's unable to be here tonight. Thank you for the opportunity to participate in the candidate forum. Unfortunately, I am unable to attend as I was already committed to a school board budget meeting at the same time this evening. As an incumbent and the current board president, I am dedicated to serving our students, staff, and community. I look forward to continuing the important work we've started. I am always available to answer any questions or discuss my vision for our schools with anyone who would like to connect. Thank you for your understanding and your support. So, for the forum rules, the moderator and format. The moderator's role is to enforce the rules, manage the time, and keep the discussion on track. I want to thank Karen and Alan Leffler, who are going to be our timers tonight. And when it's 30 seconds left, you will get a yellow, and that's where it is. You'll see that. And then at the very end, of course, it will be red. And that way you can see it too, right, Jill? Okay. Each candidate will get 2 minutes for opening remarks. The moderator will ask the first 4 or so questions that are pre-submitted. We also have collected quite a few from the audience, and they're on this table. What we'll do is combine those that are the same and make sure that those questions are out. The moderator will enforce time limits and content guidelines, and the moderator may rephrase or reject a question that doesn't meet criteria. The moderator must always remain neutral and not express personal opinions on the questions or on the answers. For the time limit, each candidate gets 2 minutes to respond to each question, and each candidate will be asked the same question, rotating who answers first throughout the question and answer portion. I told you that we have timers, and an audience member will hold up the yellow when you have 30 seconds left. We do allow for 30-second rebuttals, and each candidate will get two rebuttals. As far as audience participation, audience members are allowed to submit forum questions, and submitters will be required, I don't think I told y'all this, to put your name on it. Oh well. 1 question submitted per person, please. Cell phones, please turn those off right now. Double check and make sure, because it is very hard to concentrate when cell phones are ringing during the question and answer period particularly. As far as the question selection, selected questions will be chosen randomly to ensure fairness. The requirements are that they must pertain to issues affecting the school district, its students, or its education policies. Questions must be respectful and free from personal attacks, inflammatory language, or defamatory remarks. Questions should be clear and easily understood. Respect, code of conduct. Candidates and audience members must treat each other with respect. Personal attacks or defamatory comments are not allowed. You will be asked to leave if you violate that rule. Candidates should focus on issues relevant to the school district and avoid off-topic remarks. We do allow media. I mentioned that we may have a reporter here in a little while, and this forum may be recorded. And at at this time, we are ready to turn it over to our moderator.
Thank you, Corey. I appreciate that. Just to introduce myself, Jill Morris. I am an Eanes, so I have no skin in the game here. My son's graduating from Westlake High School in 2023. And I will concede you all one thing when I see the kids with the t-shirts saying Westlake is the best lake, that we're on a river. We're not on a lake. So you guys win that one. I'm going to be going down the line here, and I'm going to start the first question with, and I have to look at the names because I honestly have never met any of the candidates. So I'll start with Jessica, and then I'm just going to change the order every time so that everyone has a chance to go first, and everyone has a chance to go last. And I'll be trying to do my tick marks, and hopefully I'll be able to keep up with everything. I'm sure someone will call me out if I don't. So thank you, and we'll get started.
And for the candidates, when you turn your microphones on, please leave them on. Don't turn them on and off, okay? It'll cause me problems.
All right, so if everyone's ready, we'll get started with this. So the first question, we'll start with Jessica. Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm already off track. Introductions from all the candidates. Please first.
If you want to stand up, that's fine. They may not be able to see you. If you don't want to, that's fine too.
I get used to this mic. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Well, thank you guys for welcoming me today. I'm Jessica Howard, those of you guys that don't know me, and I'm running for Trustee Place 3. If you don't remember anything, just remember that. And I moved to Lake Travis in 2011 with my husband and my 3 kids in Boston, Massachusetts. And we moved to this district, to this area specifically for this school district. And I would just like it to be what it was rated back in 2011, really. And just a little bit about myself. I went to school, occupational therapist, and I started working in the schools with kids, so I have a passion to help others. Currently, I work in patient access, and I work to help patients get optimum therapy. And why I'm running for this position is I want to ensure that all our teachers, all our parents, and our students the best possible education. And I think we can do that through increased transparency, increased accountability, as well as in restoring our academic excellence. And how we can increase our, sorry, I need my notes. Sorry about that. How we're going to restore integrity. We have to be transparent, protecting the innocent, as well as making sure we include our teachers in the decision-making process. Increasing accountability by performing random audits. We need to rein in this reckless spending. It's gotten out of control. And I want to create a process by which teachers are actually able to do anonymous reporting without any fear of retaliation. I mean, that really needs to happen. Another thing is improving academic excellence. I think we can look at what's working well already in the district and replicate that. Why not replicate those best practices? And then also establish a district-wide curriculum. Why can't we ensure that everybody is thriving throughout the district? I believe we can make learning fun and challenging at the same time and produce improved academic results. I appreciate you all being here. I look forward to more questions and earning your vote. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Jonathan Bove, and I'm running for Place 4. I'm a student housing executive and educator with 2 decades of experience, along with a master's degree in education. And at Landmark, where I work, we house over 60,000 students at 100 different properties nationwide, each of which has an operating budget that rivals the district's. I'm running because of that experience, because I believe I'm uniquely qualified and prepared to serve our students here in LT. 10 years ago, my wife and I moved here from South Austin specifically to raise our children in this strong destination district. I have one daughter at Lakeway Elementary, and her younger sister will start kinder in the fall. Hi, Willow. I have a long-term vested interest in strengthening our district. Now, because we're in the middle of expanding our current high school and developing our second campus, we need development and construction experience on the board. I'm a CCIM, that's a commercial real estate certification, and I'm a faculty member for the National Apartment Association. The board has acknowledged the need for this expertise as well. It's why they formed the Bond Advisory Committee in the first place. I'm sure you'd all agree we could use that experience on the board itself. In addition to my day job, I chair the College Student Mental Wellness Advocacy Coalition. That's a group of 30 different student housing companies, all working together, housing over 1 million students, and focused on college student mental wellness, a topic that I think you'd all agree is closely related to the bullying challenges we face right here in LT. The future of public education in Texas is incredibly competitive. Given my career's lengthy focus on student success, I combine the experience and the real connection to our district that our community wants and needs to make LT ISD even more competitive for years to come. I appreciate all of you being here. Thank you.
Hello, my name is John Severance. See if you can turn yourself on. Hello? My name is John Severance, and my wife Wendy and I moved here in 2019. We've been married for 31 years, and we have 3 grown, college-educated, and independent children. As for me, I grew up in the Houston area. I attended Texas A&M University and got a degree in electrical engineering. I began my career with Exxon Research, and then quickly became an entrepreneur. I started a business called Apartment Data Services and ran that business for 37 years. In 2022, we had a nice offer to sell the business, and so I sold the business and retired. Retired and made a new commitment in my life, and that commitment was to commit myself to the Lake Travis area, and specifically the schools of Lake Travis. I have attended countless number of school board meetings and stayed up until the very end. And at the very end is where all the decisions are made and all the money is spent. But it's a long night, 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock sometimes. Currently, I am involved in 6 different committees, including the Lake Travis Education Foundation, the Budget Advisory Commission, and also, one of my favorite is mentoring at the high school level the kids in the business entrepreneurship. It's kind of like a Shark Tank. It's a wonderful, wonderful experience. And through all of that, I've come to realize that Lake Travis schools are really the heart and soul of this whole community. It's what it's all about. Our property values are directly related to the performance of our schools. But I'm a bit concerned because we have a few problems, serious problems that we need to deal with, specifically balancing some budgets and a declining enrollment. Those are things we need to deal with. And I believe it's going to take strong leadership and commitment to put our schools back on solid ground. And I believe I'm the right man for the job. Having retired with my kids all grown, I'm in a unique position to be able to dedicate my entire time and efforts toward being a school board trustee. I want to get our schools growing again, and I want to strengthen our status as a destination district. And most importantly, I want everyone's school of choice to be Lake Travis. My name is John Severance, and I'm running for school board position number 4. Thank you very much.
My name is Craig Costan.
This is going to go on.
Thanks, Jerry. My name is Craig Consian. I'm running for school board place 5. My wife and I moved here 15 years ago. I guess that makes me the longest tenured resident of Lake Travis here on the tables here this evening. We've got 2 kids in the district. They've started from the beginning. I've got an 11th grader who will graduate next year, and an 8th grader in middle school at BCMS. We're very invested in this community, very invested in this district. From coaching rec sports to sitting in PTO meetings and participating in elementary schools, dance, tennis, volleyball. I've sat next to many parents in the community and cheered on our kids together. I'm running for this position. I'm running for this position because I believe that we can build a greater future for Lake Travis School District. I believe in the potential of every student in this district and making sure that we can give them the opportunities to realize that potential. As an Eagle Scout at an early age, it's important to give back to your community. As a business professional for 25 years in cutting-edge technology, from semiconductors to artificial intelligence, I've built skills that include retaining talent, building teams, managing large budgets. These are skills I think I can bring to the board and contribute to the community and our district in a very positive way. Our district is a great place. I think we're all here tonight because we realize that. We care about the kids, we care about every kid in this community, and I do too. Look forward to answering your questions tonight, meeting more of you this evening and over the next coming weeks. My name is Craig Constantine, I'm running for Place 5.
Hello? Yes. All right, so far so good. I'm Chris Woodcock, and I'm running for Place 5 for, I just started running because that's getting used to. I'm running for Place 5 in the LTISD board. I'm a career educator with over 16 years experience in education, and I feel that we are facing some enormous challenges this coming year, and I think that educators should be on the board to help solve those issues. My family has lived in the Lake Travis area for 10 years, and I'm a proud mom to 2 boys, an elementary-aged son and a middle schooler. I taught elementary and pre-K for 10 years, and while I was working in While I was working in Austin ISD, I was part of the Elite Leadership Development Program for teachers. Then I worked for the Association of Texas Professional Educators, where I was in charge of the continuing education department, and I ran all of our programs for our then 110,000 educator membership across Texas. I tripled our budget in the time that I worked there, and currently I'm in my 3rd year on the Student Health Advisory Council, and this council is one in which we work closely with the board to advise on all matters of health for our students, behavioral, emotional, and social health. And I was part of the group who recently proposed the student cell phone ban. That has been really met with a lot of positivity in our community. With a career in education, a current teaching certification, experience in my children's schools, and vested interest in our community, I am an experienced, qualified choice for LTISD Place 5, and I'm not afraid to be a strong voice for educators and students. Thank you.
We need to not clap after every piece, or we're never going to get out of there.
All right, so I think it's time for me to start asking questions now. As Corey just pointed out, if you guys could hold your applause until the end so we can get through all the questions. We want to make sure we have time for everyone. There's a mic. So again, like I said, I'll be going down the row, and everyone will have a chance to go first. We'll have the timers here. When the yellow one goes up, you'll have 30 seconds. When the red one goes up, if you could just finish the sentence you're on. Otherwise, I'll be rude and interrupt you, and I hate doing that. All right, so let's get started. Jessica, question number 1. The state's portion of funding has not increased in 6 years and has led to a budget crisis in our district, impacting resources and programs. What steps do you believe our district should take to address this crisis, and how would you advocate for our schools at the state level?
I think you can hear me. Okay. Thanks for the question. I think that it's really important to look at like what we have right now, because we're in a $6 million deficit. And yes, we are not going to get more money, but I look over at your district and what you guys have been able to do. You made an open district. So because you guys have done that, when you look at Robin Hood, that's recapture, you guys are all familiar, 187 kids that live in Lake Travis are now going to Ian's. That's probably, I don't know exactly, but a little over $1 million we're losing and Ian's is gaining. So one of the things I would look at is, like, I think John had referenced it earlier, is like we need to make Lake Travis people want to stay in Lake Travis. I'm not waiting for something to pass because it's happening right now. Why are 187 kids going over there? So we're not satisfying these families, is what I'm trying to say. So it's happening right now, and we're losing that money that's on the table right now. And so there's something to be said for that. So that's one of the things I would really focus on. And I think there's some other things, is like looking at all of the error, like the fraud and abuse. Like I can't even begin to say that. Like $20 million we wasted on an elementary school we're not building, and $22 million extra that they just proposed Wednesday night. How much more? 30 seconds? Yeah, I hope I get more time on another budget, because the budget is a lot. So we need to rein in the reckless spending in order to talk about what we can do in the future, because this district has done a lot of reckless spending, and we've kept track of that, with the bond and a lot of other things. So until we rein in the reckless spending, I think that, that's the path forward.
Thank you, Jessica. Jonathan.
Thanks again for the question. I agree that the district is on a fixed income budget. And the only way we increase the income side of that budgetary equation is through increased attendance. I agree with having an open district. And I think the best way that we get to that open district is by completing the second high school that allows us to remain competitive. I don't think there's a single simple answer that fixes the issues on the expense side of the budget without drastically impacting student outcomes. 37 cents of every one of our dollars gets recaptured, and expenses have only increased in that 6-year period since the basic allotment was increased. Insurance alone is up 107%. So we have to go through the budget line item by line item to find savings and find opportunities to rebid our existing contracts. But I imagine
to the rental rates of our facilities that we rent out. We are also looking at, on the UT on-ramps, to share the tuition costs with the students. Some of our other involvement is business sponsorships of renovated and new buildings. So perhaps you'll be in the well, I won't say that, but okay. But so 73% of our schools, 73% of our schools are underfunded right now. And in the state legislature, as we speak, they're kicking around such wonderful ideas, some of which are not nearly big enough, but they're addressing our revenue side. Okay? So what they've got going on in SB2 and HB2 and HB3 is things that will bring together an increase in the allotment, the basic allotment of $264, which will allow, it's kind of a laugh, but it does allow us to solve perhaps 30 or 40% of our revenue budget. What I'm interested in is an allotment of about $7,160. I'd like to get payments that were based on enrollment, not attendance, and I'd like to have all of their mandates fully funded. I'd like to have the...
Thank you, John. I appreciate that. Craig?
Yeah, so I met with the CFO of the district, named Sanchez, not too long ago. It's obvious to everyone, like everybody said here, we have a top-line problem, and that's control of the state. The state has not increased funding since 2019, and obviously costs are a lot higher than they were in 2019. So we've got a top-line problem we've got to solve at the state, and our board and all the districts have spoken up But I think it's time for the community to activate as well and contact their representatives and get involved. And that's something that I'm planning to do in the coming weeks. Meet with our leaders from both sides of the aisle at the House and the Senate, and get a group of our community together to go speak and let them know, hey, we need to prioritize the future of our students in the state and all the districts, and make sure we're investing in education that's paramount to the success of every kid in the state. So I think that's a key point. We got to fix the Title I problem. Of course, on the budget side, everything, the expense, 80% of it is in teacher salaries. So it's, we can't cut teacher salaries, right? You can't, you got to look for other areas, other creative ways. I think there's opportunity to, look at some partnerships as well, with businesses and folks in the district that might be able to, create an endowment with LTEI. That's one thing that Eanes does. They do pretty well. It funds a lot of their teacher headcount, and I think that's an opportunity we should explore as well.
Thank you, Chris.
So I think we are presented with a very unique opportunity this coming year. We're really down to what happens at the legislature, because the student allotment has not increased since 2019. And we are working with far less money than we should be. Vouchers are going to further damage the funding that we have. So we really need to get creative with what we end up with. I think we don't know yet what's going to happen with vouchers. We don't know exactly what the effect is going to be on our schools, and we won't for a couple of years. I would like to focus on making our schools so good that vouchers are not even an option. And I think that is going to happen through teacher retention, 100% teacher retention. If you hire a new teacher and you are trying to train them, fill a role, and meet all of the students' needs, it is far more expensive than it is to retain a good teacher. I think we need to make sure that our class sizes stay relatively small, do not increase them. And I think we need to provide support for the teachers that we have, including incentives and resources and training. I think we really do have some wonderful educators, and we need to make sure that they get the respect that they deserve. Thanks.
Thank you, Chris. All right, so for this next question, we're going to start with Jonathan, and here it is. The new high school is planned to be smaller than Lake Travis High School, raising concerns about its ability to meet the needs of the students. What specific measures will you take to ensure that this new school provides adequate resources, facilities, and opportunities for all students to thrive? Jonathan?
Thank you. I'm not sure I necessarily agree with the way that question is phrased. I don't think our concern about high school 2 is that it's inadequately scaled. I think it is the scale that the district voted on. This is the scale that we have a need for, and I certainly think that we need to act reasonably when it comes to the demographic information that we've all been talking about tonight. I think it's also important to remember that when we open high school 2, it's not as though we're going to be staffing that thing from scratch. We have talented team members already in the district, many of whom I'm sure are going to be just as interested in working at that high school as they are at our current high school. So there's not a talent gap there. We're not starting over, but rather we're able to instead follow through on the commitment that we made to the voters in the district. We're able to attract folks from neighboring districts. If, to the point earlier, if we are an open district, then we can be competitive with Dripping and our westbound neighbors. And that allows us to remain, to the degree we are able, increasing the number of attendance-based or enrollment-based revenue that we're receiving per student, achieve better student outcomes that way. So, again, I don't necessarily think the issue is high school 2 is not big enough. I certainly think that we want to make sure that it's properly sized, But my role on the board would be to ensure that we're taking the cultural best practices, things that have made us a destination district, and replicating them at a second school's smaller scale to be able to meet the needs of students who need that particular environment. A smaller school lets more students be involved in more things. And being deeply involved at your campus always results in higher on-time graduation. Thanks.
Thanks, Jonathan. John?
Okay, I agree with Jonathan on this. The school is designed to have the same facilities, fabulous theater arts department, AV departments, gymnasiums, and football fields. The school was originally designed to hold 2,000, and when the new demographics report came out, it scared us, and we decided, okay, perhaps we need to rethink this. And so we did rethink it, and we modularized it and scaled it down to a school that can hold 1,500. And if we get to the point where we are fortunate to need more space, we can add back on that extra 500 students that they locked off there in the addendum. We definitely need high school 2. We're over capacity in high school 1, and high school 2 will allow us to get some breathing space. It will allow us to actually experience a whole new level of there are 2 high schools here in Lake Travis. That's going to be an interesting battle because there's so much history behind attending Lake Travis High School. Now there's a competitor in town. In order to get enrollment, I do agree our limited open enrollment can be focused specifically on that high school to bring in new students if we need them. I think we perhaps will be looking at that if our demographics do not improve. But I do think that the new high school will be a fabulous addition. It will help people focus on this school district and want to come to this school district. And for those reasons, I'm totally in support of the new high school. Thank you.
Yeah, so this came up at the last board meeting. It was expressed by some of the board members there that a major concern is where we are with our growth. Are we still growing at the same rate? Clearly not. Where will we be in 5 years, 10 years? The jury's out, right? We do have to take a really close look at all of our facilities, all of our plans, and make sure that we're building for the population of this district in 5, 10 years out. I think high school 2 is we've got a plan now for a modular approach, meaning build to it one size, and then if the capacity increases, we have the ability to do that. We've got to make sure that that's the right plan. We've got to make sure that we're building to the students that we'll have in this district, and not falling into traps like having to close schools down the line. It's some tough decisions that will have to be made. Nobody wants to see schools closed. I mean, just in ENC, recently, an elementary school is getting closed because they no longer have the student population to support it. We can't fall into that trap for sure. I think high school 2 presents a lot of opportunity. Would present some obviously some smaller organizations and class sizes and opportunities for students in our district. So we've got to take a good look at that and make sure that we're doing the right thing.
That's great. Chris?
I think we need to do what the voters want us to do. The voters passed a plan for a second high school, and we need to meet the plan of the voters, or the wants of the voters. I actually today was just at our high school, and it is crazy how many kids are there. It is so hard to actually get around and walk through those hallways. I mean, the infrastructure is not designed for so many kids. So I think in order for us to concentrate on enhancing our district and making it the destination district that we all moved here for, want people to move here for in the future, we need to follow through on the plan that we already have. I think as far as services go, every school that's new goes through a growing period. I think we need to give it a little bit of time to kind of catch up to hire the educators and to get the programs established and going through the community that are available at the current high school. But I have every confidence that it will happen. So thanks. Thanks. All right, Jessica.
Hi, thank you. I think that the first thing that I want to talk about is fiscal responsibility, because I think we only can build when the numbers suggest it. And I think just because people want a second high school at this time, if the numbers are stagnant, they don't suggest it, I think we really have to be fiscally responsible. How about thinking about what if we added vocational opportunities at the high school right now? Like electrician, plumbing, HVAC, cosmetology. If you added those vocational, they could be coming out into the community and doing, that would free up the classroom. And guess what? Our kids could now graduate with certificates and go into trade in the community. So I think thinking outside the box is also something that we could maybe put into action instead of, we get the money, we're gonna just build a new high school. I think we need to be more prudent. With that being said, if we did build a high school, we do need to make this an open district. And then I think sharing best practices across, you talked about sharing resources, I think we have to do that. If something is at the main school, we need to make sure that it's at the smaller school. There's nothing that should be at the big school, I don't know if I should call it like that, at the main campus, that any other campus does not have. I think that is just unacceptable. I think every school should have the same resources. So no matter where you live in the district, you should go to that school and feel you're getting the same education, if that makes sense. I hope I verbalized that correctly. And yeah, that's it.
Thanks, Jessica.
Thanks.
Okay, question number 3. Craig, we're going to start with you on this one. Academic performance in Lake Travis ISD has declined, particularly in the aftermath of COVID-19. What specific strategies would you implement to address this issue and support both students and teachers in improving its outcome?
Thanks for the question. So clearly we've got to focus on student outcomes. I mean, that's the number one priority within our district. Yes, we've seen some decline. Those were some challenging times. Nobody wants to go back there, but I think it's really recruiting, retaining the best teachers, and giving them the resources that they need to succeed. They know the students best. They know how to engage the students best, meet them where they are, and help them along. And I think that's the number one thing we can do, is really listening to our teachers and giving them the resources and support that they need, to bring the kids along and get them, to where the outcomes that we're all looking for.
So there was a curriculum study done a couple of years ago, and there are a couple of areas that we do need to address. There needs to be more consistency across every school, every grade level. But on the whole, our curriculum is actually pretty decent. I think that we really need to audit the testing that's being done. I feel that the amount of time that the kids are spending testing versus learning has become just out of control. So I'd like to take a look at that and see which tests, which would actually also help the budget, but see which tests are actually being used in a data-driven way by the teachers, and which ones are just being given because they have to, they're asked to be given. So that's one way. I think we need to move away from screens. I've talked to a lot of parents and educators, and there's just so much going on the computer and not enough group work, Socratic questioning, there's not enough project-based learning. There's so many opportunities for critical thinking to create opportunities for critical thinking in our students, and I think that spending a lot of time on screens is not the way to promote that. I think that's all I have right now.
Thanks, Chris. Hi, Jessica.
Oh, hi, thank you so much. I think it's a multi-pronged approach. I mentioned some of them earlier. One of them is establishing a district-wide curriculum so that, one campus, you can expect the same thing on the next campus no matter where you live. And then sharing best practices across campuses. If you're, same thing, if you are at West Cypress, you should have the same experience West Cypress Elementary, you should have the same experience that you would at Lake Point. Like, we should have those standards. There's no reason why we have different ratings for different elementary schools. Like, I would like to see every rating elevated to the highest rating. That's what we should, that's our goal. Like, elevate everybody up. And why can't we do that? If we have someone in, whoever's establishing the best practice, share those best practices. I don't know, my motto in sales, why I've been successful, is share the best, or steal the best and create the best. Like, why not? It just makes sense to me. And then I was thinking about it, and I was talking to teachers and students, and a lot of students don't really, sometimes at the end of the year, don't go to school, skip school because the final's not that hard. Why don't we incentivize them? You go to school every day, you don't have to take the final. Like, we can do different things, because if they go to school every day, guess what? They're going to get the content that's in the final. Why don't we incentivize them in different ways? Because and guess what? You get attendance, guess what? District gets paid. So there's different things that we can do to incentivize and create better outcomes. So those are a few of my pitches. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. I agree with the focus on curriculum. I think we already have a high-quality curriculum that already complies with TEKS requirements, and we've already purchased it, which means that we don't need to be wastefully trying to identify other ways that we can spend money on curriculum when we already have quality resources in place. I agree with the reduction in testing time versus learning time, maximizing teachers' time in the classroom. Literally one of the things I brought up earlier when I was talking in my introduction when I was talking about budgets, about protecting class sizes, about protecting planning time. That allows our teachers the maximum amount of time to prepare to deliver that instruction in the classroom. The other thing I think is that we shouldn't focus solely on our teachers here, but also the administrative staff that are supporting them. In the most recent strategic plan that the district outlined, they actually talked about 2 different strategies in their 5th best-in-class strategic goal. That 11th strategy was about maximizing the amount of support and internal growth that teachers get. At the last school board meeting that we were all at, we heard all about the mentorship program that the district has put in place, how it's trained up teachers internally. Strategy 12 talks about having top-tier admin tools, having the tools to teach those folks up from the inside the district as well, mentoring them and helping them grow. Why do I care about our admin being as strong as our teachers? You could ask any of the 1,000 people that work at Landmark. The one thing I say all the time is if you say you care about something and you don't assess it, you don't actually care about it. You just care about talking about it. So my goal is that, I'm sure we're going to talk about the superintendent. From the top down, superintendent on, we should be in the classroom assessing whether that learning is occurring so that it can be maximized for our students.
So I believe in providing a balanced and diversified curriculum that prepares every student for success, whether they choose college, careers, or military. Not every student's journey looks the same, and our curriculum must reflect that reality. Our district must equip students with the skills, knowledge, and confidence to thrive in whichever future they pursue. So what makes our district a destination district? Academic excellence, exceptional teachers, diverse curriculum, theater arts, athletics, and state-of-the-art facilities. Yesterday, as a member of the Advisory Commission on Education, I was privy to the TABR report, the report card, as they say, and it was invigorating to see the results. Our students are incredible students. The test scores that we see on that report yesterday are really fabulous. They're growing. They can be better. But let's give our kids a round of applause. We have the most spectacular children I've ever seen. When I go on campus and do my mentoring, it is an incredible journey to watch these kids smile and teach me a lot more than I'm teaching them. They're smart, they're capable, and we need to just keep cheering them on because they will accomplish great things.
Thanks, John. And I skipped over you, so you get to go first this time now.
All right.
Sorry about that. So the next question, do you believe the current amount of student testing in our district is reasonable? Excuse me. If so, what makes it effective? If not, what specific changes would you advocate for to strike a better balance between assessment and learning?
So I do believe we are adequately testing. As I just said, the results of our report, it's an 80-page, you got so many numbers, you don't know what to do with them. But there are wonderful, in-depth numbers to show that we are testing adequately. We are improving our students. It's a wonderful part of it is there's a year-to-year approval for each, not an individual child and individual class, but like in a math class, how this child did as a 3rd grader compared to a 4th grader. They measure that growth rate. And those tests that they have and the way they can monitor them is they can dictate or analyze over a time period how each individual child is progressing. And that's the level to which we are testing is credit to be able to get to those results. So I do agree our testing is adequate. I think we need a lot more eye contact with our kids and have our kids talk to us as adults and as teachers. They should inspire our children to come out of their shells and explore the world around them. I think that will help a little bit also in that. Thank you.
So, you hear a lot of feedback traveling across the district and talking to parents and teachers and students alike. Mixed feedback, right? Are we testing too much? Are we testing too little? Spending too much time, giving STAR tests and prep for STAR tests and regular curriculum tests. I think we've got to listen to our teachers, and I think they want a balanced approach. They want more instructional time. How we get that, if that means we look for opportunities to consolidate a little bit, I think that might be a good way to find that balance and again, listen to the teachers who are closest to the students and deliver the outcomes we need.
As I was just saying earlier, I feel like we have too much testing. I think we really need to take a look at this. As an educator, I've witnessed how much pressure is put on students and teachers and administrators and the community in general because of these tests. And it's really not okay, because that's a snapshot. It's a snapshot in time of a student's performance. I feel like if we focus more on activities, like I said, that promote critical thinking skills, then our students will naturally perform better and they will excel academically. I really want to talk with more educators about how they feel, because one big component in teacher retention is listening to educators and helping them feel heard. So I want to continue to get feedback from educators on their thoughts on testing. From what I've heard, it's pretty outrageous. And from what I've noticed with my eldest son, it seems like he's taking a test every single day. So I just want to work on finding ways to only include assessments that are necessary and that are strategically implemented, that we can actually use the data. So thank you.
Thank you so much for the question. Testing doesn't necessarily, it's not necessarily an accurate reflection of your knowledge. And the reason being is because some people are very good test takers and they can memorize, but the next day you could ask them the same questions and they're not that great at it. I'm probably one of them. Because I remember in college I was asked to tutor human gross anatomy and normal and normal phys, which were very hard classes, the class behind me, and I had to proctor the classes because I couldn't remember anything. And I think that's part of the equation, like thinking about that. Is it just about testing, or are we really want our kids to learn? Are we setting them up for lifelong success? Or do you want to get an A? Like, to me, it's about lifelong success. It's not about the A. right? I mean, that's my objective. And I think really kids do learn differently. My youngest son is totally an example of that because he has significant ADHD. And if you put everybody in the same box that this is the test, this is the way we're going to do it, you're going to have kids fail. That's the way it is. I mean, we see that. And if our goal is to bring this district up and increase our ratings, I think we need to start thinking differently because kids learn differently. So that's my objective. That would be how I would handle it. And yeah.
I think our answers are all pretty uniform up here. I don't know if there's a lot of daylight between us all on this. We all generally agree that we shouldn't have any more testing than we need. We agree that teachers should probably lead the way in helping us to understand what our best practices are there. So I certainly agree with my fellow candidates in that regard. You know, I teach a certification class for the National Park Association called CAPS, which just wrapped up about 2 weeks ago. And the last thing I told my students was, you've all gone through this material, you've all internalized it, whatever your learning style is, but you haven't actually taken the exam, and it's important that you're familiar with how it works. I don't want to teach to the test, but I do think it's critically important that we recognize the STAR exam's not going anywhere, so we need to have our students prepared for its format, the way it's delivered. So I make a differentiation there between practice testing, preparing them to be ready for the rigor of the exam, acknowledging that people are coming at that from a lot of different places and learning styles, but also recognizing and agreeing with my fellow candidates that over-testing simply reduces learning outcomes, takes time away from instruction, two things we want to avoid at all costs if we want to continue to improve the academic excellence of our district.
Thank you. Okay, all right, on to our next question. Chris, you'll go first on this one. The previous superintendent's departure has left the district at a crossroads. How will you ensure the district doesn't find themselves in the same situation with the future superintendent?
So I think we're at a unique place in time with this new superintendent. All of us here will not have a say in who's hired. So to start off with a new superintendent, I think it provides us with the opportunity to develop a really good relationship with them. I think we've learned, hopefully, a lot of lessons from our past experiences with the last superintendent. I think moving forward, we can apply those lessons and we can really do a better job of accountability measures, of working together on policy and procedures. I think asking the superintendent to make sure that they are forming those relationships also with the community and with the students and with the teachers is very important. But I think that we do have a unique opportunity. I'm trying to be positive about us not having a say in who's hired, but that we will get to have a fresh start with this new superintendent and go from nothing to hopefully a great relationship. So,
Thank you, Jessica.
Hi. I think with both of us saying is a few words, we just I just got a new one. This one's okay. We're gonna be quick. We just have to address the elephant in the room because the board voted unanimously to give the golden parachute and let this superintendent resign. And I think a lot of us are not too happy about that. And $240,000 with a lot of money mismanagement, not reporting crimes, children were being hurt under his watch. So he could have been fired within the first year because he did not meet the terms of his contract. If I was on the board, that would have been done. So all of those things that happened could have been avoided. And to me, like, if you're in charge of the safety of kids, you best do it. You best be a steward. And so, yes, and we have several lawsuits in our wake because of those decisions that have been made by the board. So I don't take that lightly. With that being said, I think the new superintendent needs to be fiscally responsible because of what's been going on in the district, number one, like have really strong fiscal management. And then secondly, has to be a reformer, because looking at what's happened and knowing what's gone on in the admin building, they need to really, like, I know a lot is going on, but like, you really have to make sure that they are held accountable to you all, right? And I think that's very important. Those are things that I will look for. And I'm very skeptical of the board right now hiring someone because of the decision they made to let Norton go, if that makes sense. Thank you.
You give it back to me, you don't apologize. I just want to expand on what Chris said. Certainly, just to be clear, in case anybody's confused, once a lone candidate is selected by the current board, we all have to wait 21 days. And that 21 days is the exact amount of time in the month of May before whoever is elected on the 3rd gets sworn in at the next board meeting. So it's literally a matter of agenda, whether the new superintendent gets their employment agreement signed before any of us who get elected sit down. That being said, I certainly hope that everybody in this room completed the survey here in the district to have your voice heard or attended the town hall that some of us were at to be able to provide our feedback. That's obviously critical, and to Craig's point earlier, we need to encourage our district to be open and communicative too. That being said, new superintendent starts, their only supervisor is the Board of Trustees. If seated, how am I going to keep that person accountable? 3 words. In fact, the first one is interim accountability. Clearly defined goals, X to Y, by when, and if those goals aren't met, what are the consequences for the relevant administrative members who aren't meeting them, assuming we've given them the support and the resources they need to do so. Second, present. I've already heard from students about the fact that they've seen Dr. Flores out and about in our schools in a way that has somehow shocked them, because like seeing your kindergarten teacher in the grocery store, I guess that's something they hadn't encountered a lot during the previous administration. We need that to continue. They need to be an active member of the school community. And lastly, open. We need to ensure that the new superintendent is effectively communicating the vision of the board and the vision that I agree they need to personally have for how we continue to make Lakeway a destination district.
So one advantage we have now is we know exactly what we don't want. So the process that the board is going through now is quite impressive. We had mentioned the town hall, the surveys that are being done. If you were in attendance at the last school board meeting, you got to go through the incredible detail that they are putting into the job description of this new person. We argued about, should we use the word leadership or pioneering? Should we put a period at the end of it? There was a lot to go into. How do we go out and define the type of character we want in a new superintendent? So I feel very confident that that job description is going to be held accountable for picking our new superintendent. The consulting firm that is producing all of this assures us that we have some very high qualified individuals waiting for that job description to be posted, which it was probably several days ago. So I think we're going to have a wonderful group of gentlemen and gentle ladies to choose from. And again, like I said, we know what we don't want. For a supervisor, what we need, or superintendent, we need excellent leadership and management skills. We need someone with a clear vision of where they want this district to go. And they have to have courage, a lot of courage, to make some changes that are needing to be changed. We can do all that. I know we're on a good track. I think we're going to have a wonderful new superintendent soon. I'm not sure if we're going to vote for them or not. We're a little bit not sure about the procedural pieces of that. But I feel confident we're on the right track to pick that perfect superintendent.
So clearly, any change in leadership in an organization presents an incredible opportunity, right? To kind of look inside and, listen to the community, listen to the staff, listen to the teachers, the students. And I think the process that the board has undertaken has done just that. Through surveys online, through community forums, through interviews, the detail that they've presented in the school board meeting shows exactly what we're looking for in a superintendent, what every stakeholder in this process is looking for too. I think we've got to remember we're in a people business, right? I like to think of every business as a people business. But our people here are obviously the stakeholders that I mentioned, the community, the teachers, the students, the parents. We need a superintendent that's going to engage, and I will encourage the superintendent to engage with every person, every stakeholder in the district. That's how they're going to absorb the culture. Of course, they'll get that through the interview process, but that's how they're really going to absorb and understand the Lake Travis culture. But again, I'm very optimistic about the process that the board has undertaken, and I see it as an incredible opportunity to do a reset and really focus forward on where we want Lake Travis to be. Focus on the students and the outcomes of what we want.
Thank you. All right, on to the next question. Jessica, you're going to go first on this one. The state is incenting districts to adopt the new Bluebonnet curriculum by offering an additional $60 per student for districts who use the curriculum. What do you think is the right thing for Lake Travis regarding this curriculum?
I'll be honest, I don't know about the Bluebonnet curriculum, so I have to look into it. I don't know. What I would say is, I would do my due diligence because, $60 a person sounds great, but it's not, I would want to know, what does that mean? Does it meet all the needs? Is it, is it encompassing all the students? Does it have an agenda? I don't know. So I don't want to make an opinion up here because I don't know what the curriculum entails. So I think that's pretty important. And I don't know, does the curriculum come from TASB? That does concern me, I'm not sure. Because TASB does some things, one thing I would like to put in, I'm going to put this thing in here because TASB promotes, I don't know if you guys are familiar with Texas Accreditation for School Boards. This is a way we can save, we get to save $6 million. This is another way we can save some money, potentially millions. So we pay millions to TASB. And TASB actually promotes guidance and policies that shift control away from parents and even school board trustees into the hands of unelected administrators, and even TASB itself. TASB actually took 9 months to leave the National School Board Association after it took its position of calling concerned parents terrorists. That would be us, concerned parents. So I have an issue with TASB taking that stance and us giving so much money to TASB. Carroll ISD is one of the first ISDs in the state to leave TASB. So I would propose, if I became elected, to leave TASB and look at different options that were more economical and actually follow Texas state law 26.001, involve the parents in the equation more. Because parents are partners in your child's education. So I went off track because I don't really know about the Bluebonnet. So I don't know if it's a TASB initiative. That does bother me if it was. So I brought that in. So thanks.
Thanks, Jessica. Jonathan.
I talked about this just a few minutes ago. I don't think we need to be investigating other potentially politically divisive curricula while we have one that functions perfectly well that we've already paid for. While $60 per student sounds great, it's almost completely offset in the first year by how expensive it is to roll out an entire new set of curriculum materials. I also think that, frankly, our district has been featured enough in the national news, and I kind of prefer that we keep a lower profile when it comes to divisive political issues and involving ourselves in that type of notoriety. I also think that the Bluebonnet curriculum doesn't make a lot of sense because of the fact that it reduces reading time for students and replaces that reading time with various lessons and parables and so forth. Listen, at the end of the day, I think that individual parents should be making individual choices about their individual students, not responding to those choices being imposed from outside groups. And in this case, I think every person in our district has the opportunity to teach their kids about their religion, and that's wonderful, but I don't think that has a place in our classrooms. So quite simply, I don't think that the Bluebonnet curriculum makes sense for cost, or for its separation of church and state, or for learning outcomes, and I don't think it's something we should pursue as a district.
So I just learned a little bit about the Bluebonnet.
Here now.
100% agree. We have a great curriculum. That's not our problem in this school district. Our curriculum is great. It's diversified, like I said earlier. If a kid wants to go to college, if he wants to go through a technical career, or if he wants to go to the military, our curriculum is really designed for that. That's really the sweet spot for what we do. We do not need to bring in a new curriculum. It's the $60 a person. It doesn't seem to be justified for us to move into that direction. We have other problems to solve. I think we should stay on those kind of problems, and our curriculum, in my opinion, is fine the way it is.
So I agree with John. Having not studied the Bluebonnet curriculum, I don't know what's in it, but I also don't think we're at a point where we need to go change the curriculum. Right now, I think there's a lot of things we can do and continue to focus on continuous improvement of our current curriculum and providing the resources that we need to teachers to execute that. But focusing on another, change in curriculum at this time probably doesn't make a lot of sense.
So those who aren't familiar, the Bluebonnet curriculum is a new one that was just adopted by the TEA, and it actually presents many aspects of Christianity in literal historical record, and does not do so for any other religion. I feel like districts that do adopt this curriculum, they run the risk of political ramifications, and also I think it's unethical, to be honest. What happens, what they've decided to do is to give $60 to the district per student if they adopt this curriculum. I'm a reading specialist and I've reviewed this curriculum. It is not an effective curriculum in teaching children how to read. It cuts reading time in half. The reading that it does provide is individual. It doesn't have group options. It doesn't provide teacher-to-student support. It seems like it was written very hastily, in my opinion. It's actually known as a hidden curriculum, and it's dangerous as it undermines critical thinking and it perpetuates social inequalities. So that's my opinion. Thanks.
Thanks, Chris. Okay, on to the next question. Jonathan, you'll go first on this one. Bullying remains a significant concern in our district, especially following the controversies surrounding the handling of last year's peanut allergy incident. What steps do you believe the district should take to address bullying effectively and rebuild trust among students, parents, and staff?
Thank you for the question. It's a nice segue from not needing additional notoriety nationally. I think that it's a pretty clear path towards addressing bullying head-on in the district, and I think that it's going to sound a lot like some of the other topics we've discussed tonight, because the accountability involved in addressing bullying starts from the top. There need to be clear consequences for bullying behavior in our district. They need to be clearly outlined. I guarantee not everyone in this room right now is familiar with our anti-bullying policy. They need to be effectively communicated, and they need to be enforced from the top down. And I don't think that we want to simply start by addressing bullying incidents, but rather we need to create an environment where our students not only feel comfortable bringing those concerns forward if they come up, but they also feel confident that those concerns will be addressed and addressed appropriately, they'll be heard and not pushed to the side, they'll be resolved and addressed in the summer. I talked earlier about the College Student Coalition that I've worked with that focuses on mental health. And we not only do research that identifies the behavior of students who are in crisis, right, the red flags for a student who might be bullied or feeling isolated or lonely. We also try to focus on the behaviors that students report when they say that they are thriving, so that we've got only not a starting point, but also a destination, a place they can head to as they continue to grow. So it's my hope in the district that we not only equip our students with the tools to feel safe, but also to feel like they're thriving. Thank you.
I will advocate for a well-rounded curriculum that approaches relationships with staff and the recruitment of talented teachers who actively enrich learning and social cultures. Promoting mentorship, unique learning opportunities, and safe school environments will help ensure every student feels at home in their school campus and in the classroom with the necessary support to thrive. Students thrive when they are in a safe and secure environment, and I'm committed to creating a culture of awareness on all forms of safety, including social, emotional, and physical. Training our teachers and administrators in preventing and responding to bullying, and creating regular awareness programs for students and faculty on threats such as food allergies and human trafficking. I think we need to have clear policies and consistently enforce the policies. And those two policies I will show you tonight are the FFH and FFI, the freedom from discrimination, harassment, and retaliation, and the freedom from bullying. These are well-documented procedures to go through. We just need to do that and do it consistently. The peanut incident is embarrassing to this whole school. It was handled wrong, and it's a transparency thing, most likely. But we have policies, we should read them, and we should implement them.
Yeah, so clearly school safety is paramount to student outcomes, right? The two are tied hand in hand. A student doesn't feel comfortable in a school, can't realize the full potential and opportunity that they have ahead of them. We've got to rise above the minimum standard. TEA puts a minimum standard for bullying prevention out there. Our district rises above that, and really, puts in place strong policy that we also enforce. And everybody needs to be clear about it, understand it, and when issues arise, they need to be handled quickly, right? We need administration, and we need to follow the guide rubric, determine if it's an incident, and address it very quickly.
I agree with that. I think bullying is abhorrent, and it has no place in LTISD. It does directly correlate to student achievement and to student social and emotional health. I think that we need to address the culture that we've created in our district. Accountability and transparency, of course, but having a top-down approach is necessary. We need to hold everyone accountable in the same manner, not just because a student is, really good at one certain thing, and that teacher thinks that they should play in the next band concert or whatever, doesn't mean that they should get out of the accountability that they deserve. I think we really need to hold everyone accountable, and I think we have an opportunity to educate as well, like educate our entire community with this.
Hi, thank you for the question. We have laws in place, we have policies in place. They just have not been enforced, and that's a problem. And I do agree, it does come from the top. Why do children even bother to sign a code of conduct when few actually even have any consequences? And those consequences never really change the behavior. And I don't necessarily blame the children, because the brains are not fully formed till they're 25 years of age, right? What I do blame is the adults in the room, because it's our job. When the children misstep, it's our job to show them what right behavior looks like. And we're not doing that, so we're failing. We are failing our children, and I think we need to recognize that as a community. And I think we need to do a better job, and it comes from all of us. It comes from us parents, it comes from teachers, and it certainly comes from the admin. And I'll tell you, there have been multiple decisions by the board, by our board currently, that has turned a blind eye to the bullying along with poor crisis management. And this has led our district to multiple new lawsuits and litigations. We're $6 million in debt. We cannot afford more. And that's not just about the money, of course. It is always about the children. So I think we need to do better, and I demand we do better for our children.
All right, thank you. All right, John, we're back to you going first this time. School vouchers are a contentious issue, leading to a potential impact on public school funding and student outcomes. How do you think Lake Travis ISD will be affected by the state of Texas school voucher program, and what specific actions would you take to address these issues?
All right, so vouchers, like it or not, here they come. Right? I think that's pretty consistent in everybody's interpretation of what's about to happen. So, what do we do about it? Because I think all we have to do is have a plan. And my plan that I would like to have put in place is very much parallel to what I've done as a business. For the last 37 years, you just simply have a relationship like a business has to a customer. I think for us to pivot, we need to pivot our school-student relationship into a business-customer relationship, where all of our existing students are considered customers. And we need to treat them such that we want to retain them every day. We don't want them to go to the competitor. We also, and I've tried to get this number and it's not quite available, we need to take our school district borders and identify every school-age child in this border, if they attend our schools or not, because those are our potential customers. And we need to know who our potential customers are and what types of things they're looking for in a school. And then we need to create a marketing plan and a sales plan to go after those potential customers and turn them into new customers, i.e. new students. I think that's the mentality we need to take, more like a business and customer relationship.
Definitely agree that we're getting in a more competitive environment, right? I think writing to the wall with what might happen in this legislative session on vouchers. I've always advocated for more school funding, and I don't think there's anybody sitting at this table or on the board today that wouldn't advocate for more school funding. But we have to have a contingency plan. If vouchers are approved at the state level, what are we going to do about it? And I think, to John's point, one of those things is making our schools more competitive, trying to attract students with a great promotional plan. We're doing a lot of great things in Lake Travis. We have a lot of opportunities presented here in this district that aren't presented in private school options out there in the community. We have to promote that. We have to tell the world about it. And people will see that, and then they'll come and we'll keep our enrollment numbers up, continue to get the funding we need, and drive forward.
I think the board has a responsibility to educate our community about vouchers and help our community, our parents, understand how to advocate at the legislature for our schools. Vouchers are designed to dismantle public education, and we need to stop them. It's very unfortunate that we have to likely deal with them this year. I really hope that we can get a plan going where we can advocate, have every parent and community member out there advocating for our public schools so that we don't have to deal with this more than 1 year. I can't say enough how horrible vouchers are. They're likely to pass, very likely, and so we are going to have to get creative with the strategic cuts that we make so that we don't harm students and that we don't harm teachers. Again, I think teacher retention is really one of the most important things that we focus on with the budget. And then, again, I think that if we, I just really think we need to advocate at the legislature for this. It harms everyone. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Yeah, I've not supported the vouchers. It's really not about education policy. It's about big money and corporate control. I hope you take away the rhetoric of school choice and education reform, because these bills are funneling billions of taxpayer dollars into the pockets of private vendors, social impact investors, as well as politically connected organizations. Who are those organizations, might you ask? Well, I can tell you a few. Microsoft, IBM, Google-backed firm, In Bloom, which is Bill Gates. Do you want Bill Gates in your home, in homeschoolers? I don't. And then who controls the money? One, the TA is overseeing the school compliance. And two, guess what? The $10,000, you don't get to control it. Texas Comptroller of Public Accounts controls all the money. That's the gatekeeper. I don't know if you guys know that. And then another thing, corporations are buying and selling your student data for predictive analytics. I think you guys should be upset about that. And then also, that being said, we need to prepare if it does pass. You know, I'm not very much against it. I think looking at vocational tracks, making, like, obviously Lake Travis, why you want to come to Lake Travis, different than any other district. Kids can come here, obtain training potentially, make it an open district, open it up to other schools. I am for making Lake Travis great again. We need solid leadership. That is a must. That is accountable to the constituents. We have amazing Lake Travis families. We have amazing teachers. And if we all work together, we can restore the excellence to Lake Travis. So, that's what I got.
I agree completely that our district has to be more competitive in recruiting and retaining students. It's literally one of the first things I said when we all sat down here tonight. It does seem that vouchers are likely to pass, although we've seen some great work in delaying those calls for votes, and I hope folks keep fighting the good fight, and definitely going down and making our voices heard at the Capitol is critical to that work. But here's the good news. If they do pass, and we do have to become competitive, I'm uniquely qualified to help our district do that. Every year, at 100 different properties across the country, we have to refill from scratch the students who are living with us. We build off-campus apartments. Nobody's required to live there. We have to market to students as best in class. We have to fill our beds. The district has to fill its seats. We have to make sure that our resident satisfaction is high. It's 98% across our portfolio as reported by our residents. We need to do the same here in our district. We have to make sure that obviously we collect our rents, and just like here in the district, we have to make sure that we collect every piece, every penny, every dollar that we can. I think John raised some great points about how we can increase some of those revenue line items. We need to find every other opportunity as well. We have to educate our parents, just like Chris and Craig said, to be advocates for our district, and we have to ensure that we're effectively communicating those updates to our district so that they don't feel like the things that are coming down from the state level are the result of the district's planning, but rather we take advantage of the opportunity to continue to make our district a destination by competing directly to have students stay here and be in love with being here in Lake Travis.
All right, thank you. Okay, so we have completed the questions here, and now these are audience questions. There are a lot of duplicates, so we are going to have 4, just so that you all are here for the rest of the night. We will start with question number 1, and this will go to Craig first. Okay. Special education funding and equity. Lake Travis has had special ed funding cut $2.4 million. How will you ensure children like mine, visual deficits, and mild cerebral palsy receive consistent, equitable support as programs are relocated and funding shifts? Texas is 43rd in special ed services per National Center for Learning Disabilities as of 2023. Okay.
Yeah, so obviously the district has a responsibility to, meet every student where they are and ensure that, every student can get the best possible outcome, regardless of the situation. And, I think cutting, we're looking at budget cuts, which are imminent, to make sure that, we can keep the budget deficit as small as possible. Special ed funding is not one that I would be looking at. We've got to make sure these students who are in most need get the support and the resources that they need, get the teachers and the staff that they need to help them be successful.
All students deserve to receive an excellent education in LTISD. Currently, about 15% of our students qualify for special ed services, and we need to make sure that the budget adequately reflects the needs of these students. We have an incredibly involved group of parents in special education in the Parent Advisory Council, and they're doing a great job of advocating for their children and our children. We need to listen to them. We We need to give them a voice and hear them. They know best about their children and their needs. We need to find a way to fully staff our schools to meet the needs of our special education students and ensure that they don't leave LTISD to find services elsewhere. We must ensure that we're supporting our special education staff. I know that last year a lot of positions were cut and they were claimed to be empty positions when I've spoken with a number of special education teachers, and that wasn't the case. I think that all children deserve a safe and equitable education. Our district needs to cultivate a climate that sees value in individual differences, allows kids to be themselves without fear of retaliation for their personal safety, and appreciates the strengths that diversity brings to our schools.
Thank you so much for this question. I want to add something to it, because not only did they unanimously, because every single board member voted to defund or take away $2.4 million from special ed, but they also used our taxpayer dollars on an audit from TASB to tell them to do so. Looking at the numbers, I would not need to pay for an audit to have someone tell me to defund special ed when I can see that there's an increase in special ed, in the numbers of population of special ed, and then there's a decrease in gen population. Why on earth would you decrease funding for special ed when we have a dramatic increase in the number of students in special ed? It makes no sense. And I would not pay for an audit from TASB out of taxpayer money to tell me to do so. Like, first of all, I just want to say that out the get-go, because that really got me angry. I have 3 kids. All of them had 504s. I know what it's like to go to the ARD meeting. I know what it's like to advocate for your 504 with your teachers. And I know how hard the special ed teachers work. And I thank you guys, because I tell you, you're doing God's work. You really are. And so what I would do to ensure that, you're getting that $2.4 million back, and if I have to take from the admin salary, I would do it. That is ridiculous that $2.4 million got taken from you. And it should be back immediately. The fact that some of those kids don't have aides when they should have them, so that's what I would do. And I would look at the numbers of enrollment, make sure that all the special ed basically is taken care of. Like, that's a priority for me.
I had the opportunity to go to coffee with the principal yesterday at Lakewood Elementary, and I sat with a couple of our special education parents who were there to voice some concerns about communication in a way that I think is, frankly, the perfect microcosm for the communication issues in the district. I don't know if some of you know this, but on Monday night, about 30 of our special education parents in the district got an email that said, oh, hey, by the way, we're going to move around some of the campuses where life skills and G3 are being taught, just to kind of spread things out and make those resources a little more distributed. No prior warning, they get a phone call and an email. It absolutely does not hold up, right? And the fact of the matter is that I certainly think parents need to be involved in the education of their kids, but I don't think that the fact that you have a child with special education needs means that you should have to advocate for them as a whole other full-time job, right? I think from what I've heard from those parents, the biggest thing that would help them, certainly in addition to getting that funding restored, is consistency, is being able to rely on the district when they communicate how they're going to respond and serve those students' needs, and following through on those commitments. And another simple but really great point about our budget when it comes to special education, we pay roughly a 20% markup for every consulting or contractor special education team member, rather than somebody that's hired inside the district. I think it's pretty obvious that there's room in that 20% to pay those staff members more, to get them on our team and retained, to reinforce that consistency that our special education students and parents need.
Very well put. It is the staffing. We need to maintain our staffing so that we can provide the services that we are mandated by the state to provide, and should, as humans, know to provide these services. We have 15% of our enrolled students with special education needs. That's about 1,600 students. Many of us that don't have kids that are in need of special education, we don't understand the daily struggles that parents go through just to assure that their kids are receiving the proper attention and services that they need. I mean, that is, just like Jonathan said, that's just not right. We shouldn't do that. It's our job as a school to provide them and to know what to provide. Last year, as we talked about, there was a budget cut that trimmed down some of the personnel. And what I enjoyed the most out of the school board meetings that I went to, when the public comments came up and the parents showed up one after another, after another, after another. They had wonderful stories to say. The board listened and the board responded quite immediately. And they put that money that they trimmed from the budget right back into the budget. It took us from originally a $6 million deficit to a $4 million deficit back to a $6 million deficit. But they did listen and they did react to that, and that's an important thing. For any of you who do have special education children, I promise that all the special education services that we provide, I will advocate for those to be even stronger in the future. It is a very important thing that we don't get wrong this time. Thank you.
Thanks, John. All right, this last question of the night. So here we go. Chris, we'll go to you first. What is your stance on book bans, especially those disproportionately targeting race, gender identity, and disability representation?
I say no to book bans, 100%. Sorry, let me find my notes on this. So book banning is a violation of our First Amendment, and it's just very wrong in my opinion. And I'm not alone in my perspective. 91% of voters, regardless of political party, not support book banning. And I want to be clear, the legal definition. Hello? The legal definition. I know a lot of people are kind of drawing the conclusion that books have pornography in them, but the legal definition of pornography and the books in our school do not fall under the same purview. I think we have incredible librarians in our schools. I think we need to respect them and treat them as the professionals that they are, allow them to do their jobs because they do those very well. And we currently have a program in place that allows parents to flag certain books, and they can always have conversations with librarians about their needs for their own kids. But I don't believe that the voice of a small minority of loud parents should be making the decisions for all of our children. So no to book bans.
Thanks, Chris.
Hi, thank you so much for the question. First, I think the word ban is controversial because when books are looked at, sometimes they're not banned, they're put in a more age-appropriate grade, if you will. What if it's in a grade 3 or 4, elementary, and it's actually more appropriate for high school. So banning, I don't like the word banning. And two, I haven't really never spoke about book banning personally, because every time a book goes off the shelf, the content can still be available on the Chromebook. And I think it's a very divisive topic for our community. And I think there's so many more things when kids are getting beat up in, when they go to the bathroom. I think, you talk about a book, it's just not my priority to talk about things. But if we just uphold state law and focus on state law, like Texas Education Code 43.24, I'm just about following state law. That's it. And then, and also, another thing, I want to avoid lawsuits. Ken Paxton just recently sued Coppell ISD for illegally teaching woke and the CRT curriculum. I look at it like in a big picture. I do not want to put this district on more litigation. We have way too many lawsuits right now, and bless you, we can't afford it. Like, we're $6 million deficit. I want to make us fiscally responsible, and I think that's the angle that I'm looking at. So I hope that answered it in a way anyways, that's my stance.
The question asks about book banning and also asks about specifically books that cover issues of diversity and inclusion. I want to be clear from the get-go. Our district is diverse. There are students from all sorts of backgrounds living here in the district, and they have guaranteed by the law here in Texas equitable access to education. We know from repeated research that when students, when kids see themselves represented on the page, they feel at home, they feel a part of their community, they feel like they belong. That's the inclusion. I get that DEI is a hot button word, but the fact of the matter is that it's guaranteed in the Texas State Constitution. And if you don't think so, then I don't really know where you want to start that argument. We already have a system in place in the district where parents can make individual choices about what their individual students read. You can log in right now to those systems and tell your librarian, I don't want my student to read this topic or that topic, this theme or that theme. We should be having working relationships with our librarians, highly trained professionals who, quite frankly, do not deserve to hear in our school board meetings, public meetings that are a matter of record, being called, they don't deserve to be called groomers or pedophiles in public meetings, full stop. So no, I don't support book bans or removing books from circulation. I support parents making individual decisions about their individual children. Thanks.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Give John a chance to answer.
Okay, so I think we've learned a lesson from 2 or 3 years ago that we brought attention to our school district that didn't raise us up to the highest level. I think we need to be very cautious how we approach these items, and I do believe that the procedures and the policies that we have put in place because of that are quite adequate. The current LTISD instruction and library materials challenge process, policies EFA.
Parental rights. The Texas Education Code provides that parents have a right to be partners in their children's education. And I think we now have systems in place, as Jonathan referenced, that allow parents to understand what their kids are looking at online. I don't know how many of you guys are getting emails every week about what my kid is searching for on their Chromebook. They can understand what books they're checking out in the library, what they're reading, and a parent can choose to put certain restrictions. I think these are good processes and systems that we have in place, and perhaps opportunities we can continue to look to improve them. I'd also say that, the library instruction policy is now finally compliant with state law. The Reader Act was passed in 2023, and our district just waited and sat there waiting to, update its policies until July of last year. So now that these policies are in place, I think we've got great librarians, great teachers, great parents and administrators, and when they work together, that's a win for our district. That's a win for our students. And I will support the policies that we have today.
Thank you, Craig. And I think that wraps up everyone. So I'm going to hand back over to Corey.